Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Hey amigos, you know what's really easy to do and even easier to forget? Please help me out and hit that like button if you're listening on YouTube. And if you're listening somewhere else, what the hell? Pop in, give me a thumb. Say hello while you're at it. It helps me a ton with the algorithm, and besides, it's real nice to see you there. And now, on to the show. Welcome, friend. Just a week till Halloween and I've finally decided on my costume. How's this for an idea? I'm going to dress up as a reclusive backwoods survivalist who's also kind of bookish and does podcasts in his spare time. And Chester here, he's going to be my pet gator. How's that sound, Chester? Won't cost me a cent. He's just upset I won't take him to Spirit Halloween. Place costs an arm and a leg. Especially when your pet starts chewing on the animatronics. Alright. Hey, Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights has a big anthology book full of your favorite stories. Take a second and visit chillinbook.com for the perfect Halloween read. Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights 30 Tales of Terror contain just that. 30 tales never before available in print. All accompanied by a grim illustration by David Romero. Unrelated, smoke 'em if you got 'em and drink those glasses to the bottom, y'all, 'cause old Drew Blood has a couple of tales to tell. Our first story comes courtesy of our old pal Gray Walker. In it, we join Adam in a post-apocalyptic America where uneasy alliances can have fatal consequences. So without further delay, from author Gray Walker, I give you Tower. Adam remembered when it had appeared 5 years ago, when civilized society had rotted. All the news feeds could focus on was the tower. Looking like some grisly rendition of its tarot counterpart, the tower loomed against the sky, slowly rotating in place as lightning flashed around it and strange hums sounded. The news feeds were clogged with reports of the tower, wild speculations as to its purpose. One strange thing was that everyone on Earth could see the tower, but no matter how far they walked, drove, or flew, they could never reach it. Instead, the tower came for them. For most major cities, people woke up to find that the tower was spontaneously looming over the skyscrapers. Then, without warning, it would release a wave of energy into the city before a series of hidden doors flew open, releasing legions of flying and crawling beasts into the city. These creatures, the tower spawn people called them, would hunt down people at random, sparing others. They would kill them, take their bodies back to the tower, and they would return as vacant, shambling ghouls to terrorize their former kind. Such was the fate of those whom the tower considered as unfit. For a third of those left behind, however, the tower had changed them in a decidedly unusual way. The marked, named as such for intricate tattoos that blossomed along inky vines on their skin, were granted strange powers, including enhanced senses, shape-shifting, psychic powers, and many more. It had been observed that the marks on these people would change with how long they survived, and more importantly, how many of the spawn and each other they killed. With the marks, their power would grow too. Having made a pit stop in Atlanta, or what remained of it, Adam was scrounging around a derelict shop, Uncle Mike's Emporium, as the ruined sign outside labeled it, stuffing his knapsack with as many non-perishables as he could find. To his surprise, he found an abandoned shotgun behind the counter.
"Hell of a place you were running here, eh, Mike?"
Adam muttered. Checking it, he found that it was loaded and hadn't even been fired. He was in the process of placing spare ammo in his bag when he heard a gun clicking behind him.
"Don't move,"
the stranger whispered, before the silence of the shop was split by a gunshot, followed by the repugnant screeches of a creature that had crouched just 6 feet from Adam. Seeming to resemble a massive spider with a humanoid face, it rolled on its back, thrashing and shrieking as a putrid liquid gushed from its missing leg. The stranger, wielding a lever-action rifle, approached the spawn. He shot at its 7 remaining legs, taking his time as the creature's screeches turned to pathetic whimpering. Taking aim at the head, he ended its pain, then turned to Adam.
"Gotta mind your surroundings, bud,"
the man quipped.
"Yeah,"
Adam agreed, gazing skeptically at the stranger and his gun, not sure if he should rack a shell.
"Thanks."
"Relax, man. I'm not a disciple," he said in a reassuring manner, while the multitude of tattoos seemed to say otherwise. He did speak in a more relaxed tone than the brutal gangs of marked cultists who worshipped the tower. They usually spoke in a more frenzied, disjointed manner, and the ones he had met had tried to kill him there and then.
"Name's Nathan,"
the stranger said, offering a hand to Adam.
"Adam,"
he answered with some hesitation, then shaking Nathan's hand.
"A pleasure,"
Nathan said, then gazed up at the sky as it began to change to red.
Night's coming on quick. I've got a place set up nearby. Last thing you need is to be caught out here alone with those freaks."
Agreeing reluctantly, Adam went with Nathan. When they reached his improvised shelter, an abandoned apartment, they sat down on aged chairs. Nathan pulled a small cooler between them, then pulled out 2 cans of beer, handing one to Adam. Adam eyed the tattoos that covered his body, almost putting a Maori warrior or Yakuza to shame, in contrast to the meager designs placed on his own arms by the tower.
"Been at this a while, I take it?"
he mused, partly as a question and partly as a remark.
"What can I say?"
Nathan answered casually as he finished his beer.
"World changes like this. You either change with it, or..."
As if an invisible force was crushing it, the beer can changed into a flat, crumpled piece of metal, illustrating Nathan's point vividly before he casually reached for another. Adam tried to hide how Nathan unsettled him with his social Darwinism. Still, he felt compelled to ask,
"If that's the case, why'd you help me?"
Nathan raised an eyebrow.
"Who said I helped you? I was just killing that thing. You happened to be there. And you don't have much power for me to take anyway. So I figured, what's the harm in making a new pal?"
New pal? Adam wondered to himself. Or spawn bait? Adam decided to change the subject, moving to the stories of the 2 men. Adam explained how he had lived in a small town in Alabama before the tower had appeared. Birmingham had been swarmed by the spawn, and the invasion had spilled over into his home, resulting in the deaths of many townfolk. The marked people, like himself, had been considered bad omens by those who lacked such designs and power, and so they were forced out of town. At this point, Nathan coughed on his beer, before looking up at Adam with shock, but not for the reason he thought.
"Are you telling me you guys just let them do that? Didn't fight back? Nothing? If it was me, I'd have torn them to pieces with my bare hands."
Adam, again feeling disturbed, replied,
"Well, I didn't blame them. Folks were scared. Besides, I wouldn't hurt anyone unless they shot first. That's what my pa always taught me anyway. Don't you never hit nobody unless they're hurting you or someone else, son. If I ever hear you did, I'ma climb out the grave and tan your hide myself."
Nathan listened, giving a chuckle at the last bit.
Sounds like quite a guy. Kinda had the same attitude to my son, if I'm honest.
Here his voice became somber, and Adam turned his attention to his new companion.
You have a son?
Adam asked, though he had a feeling he knew the answer.
Had a wife and son back in Texas. Boy's name was Jack. My wife's name was Marcy.
He shifted in the seat.
I wasn't the best dad he could have asked for. Wasn't the best husband neither. Most days I'd come home from work, pick up a bottle of whiskey, then slouch my ass in my chair. Little Jack or Marcy even came close to me, I'd tell them to fuck off. Said other vile shit to them. Jack tried to talk to Marcy about something, I'd yell at him for being a sissy, then at Marcy for trying to make him a sissy. Of course, that kind of shit doesn't fly anymore. She left Texas with Jack one day. Never told me where she was going. Then this happened.
He gestured at the red sky.
It's why I'm traveling, you see. I'm trying to find them or anything left of them. I ain't expecting them to live with me again, not even if the tower vanished and everything went back to normal. I just want to tell them I'm sorry.
He grimaced as if trying to hold back tears. Adam just gaped as Nathan bared his soul to him. Clearly, this had been a long time coming, and Adam was the first person he had let all this out to, but he didn't know what to make of it. Nathan had indeed been a lousy father and husband, but he seemed genuinely remorseful, wanting to make amends for his mistakes. They sat in silence for a while before Nathan changed the subject and asked,
Why don't you have more marks? Ain't you killed none of those freaks out there?
Sure, but I don't know. I guess I haven't really put my heart in it.
What do you mean?
Nathan inquired, leaning forward slightly with his eyebrow cocked.
What little killing I've done, disciple or spawn, has been in self-defense. Like I told you, my pa taught me that. I only fight when I don't have a choice. If I can run, I prefer that. Even to spawn?
Nathan scoffed.
Those things invaded us, killed God knows how many people, and you prefer to run from them?
It's not like I feel sorry for them, but I hate killing anything. The first thing I killed was a disciple, and it was by accident.
Adam retold the story. He remembered smelling the tattooed savage before seeing him. The pungent scent of his unwashed skin made his presence obvious. He had suddenly appeared out of thin air and lunged at Adam with a large bowie knife, and the two grappled on the ground. The disciple, having given in to the urges of cannibalism like so many others like him, was salivating over his soon-to-be meat. However, he was distracted for a millisecond to sniff Adam, presumably to check the freshness of his meal. That fraction of time was all it took for Adam to instinctively grab the hand holding the blade and shove it into the attacker's throat. Blood gushed from the wound and he choked for a few moments before falling limp. However, the true confirmation of his death had come when one of his tattoos slid off his skin like wet paint, then began forming on Adam's arm. He had wept for a time, the shock and guilt being too much for him. Insane cannibal or not, he had still killed a human being. When he had been able to get a hold of himself, burned the body, too often the spawn liked to dig up fresh corpses and bring them to the tower. So many survivors had resorted to impromptu cremation. I already had telekinesis. It was the first thing that showed itself when I got my marks. The power I picked up from him was invisibility. Guess it makes sense that I'd get that, huh? Nathan just listened, his expression neutral. Well, Obviously you have a ways to go, he said, sipping at his beer. But I reckon we can help you put more heart into it, and maybe even get you some better powers. Despite some initial reluctance, Adam went with Nathan the next day. They left Atlanta and began a long trek up the East Coast, encountering other survivors and disciples alike. The spawn kept their distance in the lime green daylight, except for a few stragglers here and there. At night, they would set up shelter and take turns watching. A distinct camaraderie began to form between them. Two men in a world beset by demons, gathering the power they needed to survive. For all of their rapport, however, Adam often wondered if Nathan could be hiding something from him. The backpack he carried held particular interest for Adam due to how protective he was over it. During one raid on a disciple camp in Virginia, as the disciples consumed meat of dubious origin, Nathan had conjured a vortex of flame and hurled it into the small site, incinerating 8 of the 14 savages. Those who were left to gape in shock as their compatriots screamed were quickly gunned down by the pair, with Nathan lifting 2 large tree limbs and impaling one on each. Adam, meanwhile, made use of his invisibility and appeared behind one of the disciples, jamming a knife into his back. Before the other could react, Adam removed a pistol from his belt and fired into his chest. He felt the familiar pang of remorse he once felt before all of this, but under Nathan's tutelage, he had grown more ruthless, more willing to accept that these men had forsaken their humanity and therefore didn't deserve to be treated as such. Still, he couldn't help but notice how the disciples seemed to possess slightly fewer tattoos than Nathan. All of a sudden, the disciple he had stabbed started letting out gurgling laughs through a mouthful of blood. "What?" he demanded.
"Your buddy,"
the brigand croaked with a defiant sneer.
"He's got the mark of immolation on him."
This caused Nathan to snap his head up, a look of panic briefly flashing over his features. Before the puzzled Adam could ask what that meant, there was a shot from Nathan's rifle, and half of the disciple's head exploded in a shower of blood and bone. Reeling back in shock, Adam removed his knife from his back, covered in crimson.
"Come on,"
Nathan said, trying to sound detached, but containing traces of panic in his voice.
"We need to take as many of their supplies as we can carry."
Adam, still in shock from how quickly Nathan had executed the disciple, nodded and began to gather up what supplies they could, though they left the uncanned meat. When they were back at their own campsite, Adam had washed up and both ate in silence. After a while, Adam asked,
"What was he talking about, Nathan?"
The same look crossed Nathan's face, and for a split second, Adam was prepared to turn invisible. But Nathan relaxed, then sighed and began to explain, opening his shirt to reveal a mark shaped like a bleeding dagger over his heart.
"The marks don't just symbolize power, Adam. They also symbolize aspects of someone's personality, intentions, that kind of thing. The mark of immolation, as the disciples call it, represents sacrifice. If the worst has happened to my Marcy and Jack, you see where I'm going with this."
The way he said this didn't do much to settle Adam's nerves, but he didn't press the issue further. Still, he took his knife to bed with him despite being almost certain that Nathan was aware. He didn't notice the mark forming over the vine of his left arm, a theater mask slipping off of a skull, similar to the last disciple. It began to burn, but he clenched his teeth and made no sound. Adam felt the effects of the unnamed disciple's mark soon enough. Whenever he would speak with someone, it would begin to burn when they were lying or otherwise concealing the truth. He didn't tell Nathan,
not after what he had witnessed at the camp. He didn't know what Nathan was hiding, but from then on, he was careful about the way he spoke. Adam and Nathan made it to the ruins of Washington, D.C. after several more weeks of travel. As soon as they reached the peak of a hilltop, an all too familiar sight appeared. Where a white obelisk should have been standing, now the tower overshadowed everything beneath it. It seemed to have materialized just like that. Congregating beneath and encircling the structure were many of its grotesque children. This marked the first time that Adam had seen the structure so close. All at once, nightmarish visions began to flash before his mind. Things that made the spawn look like animals in a petting zoo by comparison. Adam covered his eyes and screamed, almost wanting to squeeze his eyes from the sockets if it meant never having to see what the tower showed him. He saw his old townfolk being eviscerated. He saw illusions of his father speaking with disapproving vulgar tones, and just before he felt the impact and his vision faded, he saw Nathan, the man whom he had called his companion over these many weeks, grinning like a lunatic as he raised his rifle and slammed the butt of it into Adam's temple. When he woke up, he was tied to a tree, with his arms behind him and around the trunk. As he groaned from the pain in his head, he remembered what he had seen just before he lost consciousness. Nathan. Adam stifled his rage, then began to test his bindings. They had been done quickly, crudely, and he could feel several loose points in the ropes. He glimpsed his effects, including his shotgun lying several feet in front of him. Before he had time to really try and free himself, he was startled by a horrific creature stalking out of the woods. Except this was no spawn. Despite the needle-like teeth, the cruel claws, and the corpse-like pallor of its skin, he recognized the marks that spread over his body, including several new ones. The most prominent, however, was the mark of immolation. It was gleaming in unholy light.
It's time, Adam,
Nathan said in a distorted, frantic tone.
What the hell are you doing?
What I've needed you for. The tower, it spoke to me, Adam. It needs us. It needs our souls, our flesh. It told me that in exchange for forming a bond with someone and then giving them to it, it would return my Marcy and Jack to me.
Adam thought back to how he had said the mark represented sacrifice, how he was willing to do anything to bring them back. Then something came to his mind.
How do you know they're dead?
Without responding, Nathan reached into his backpack, and Adam had to withstand the urge to vomit as he gazed in horror. They were there. The rotten heads of a woman and a child.
You...
Yes. When they left, the tower told me where to find them. When I did, I killed them. But the tower got angry. I had squandered its gift, it said. It told me that the only way to atone for it was to form a bond with someone. Sacrifice them to it the next time it appeared to me, and they would be returned. But this time, they would be completely obedient. They would never leave. They would be my Marcy and Jack, as they were always meant to be.
As Nathan was rambling, Adam felt the hastily tied knots loosen, but he didn't bring his arms around yet. Instead, he let the beast that he had once called his friend approach, knife in hand. As he brought the knife up, Adam slammed his palms against Nathan's temples, prompting him to cry out in pain and drop the knife. Wasting no time, Adam kicked the blade away and began aiming a series of punches and kicks at his former friend. Some landed, others were parried. Nathan fought with the desperation of a rat cornered by a cat, swinging wildly and slashing with his claws. Despite Nathan's unrefined fighting style, Adam took more damage than he was able to deal out. Between Nathan's transformation and his superior combat prowess, he was able to bring Adam to his knees. Thinking quickly, Adam turned invisible. Caught off guard, Nathan's eyes darted to and fro in a panicked expression, his breath coming out in frantic wheezes. He was so preoccupied that he didn't notice the shotgun, which Adam bashed him with as he had done before. Then reappeared. Nathan looked up at Adam with fury, then in horror. Blood dripping down his face, Adam held the shotgun, but he wasn't aiming at Nathan. He was aiming for the heads.
Adam?
Nathan whispered in a mix of anger and pleading.
Adam, please. They're mine. If you destroy them, the tower's ritual will be... You have to understand.
Adam coldly interrupted with a gunshot, then quickly pumped and fired again. Both heads were reduced to dust in a fraction of a second. Screaming in horror, Nathan turned his gaze to the tower.
Please!
He begged the structure.
I brought you the sacrifice you asked for. That's enough, isn't it? Please take him and give them to me.
There was no verbal answer from the tower, save for the same pulsing noise that everyone had grown used to over the years. But a response came from Nathan all too soon.
No. You can't. Please. I've done what you asked for.
Suddenly, a spawn pounced onto Nathan, followed by at least 5 more dogpiling him and sinking their claws, fangs, stingers, and whatever other weapons they had into his flesh. He screamed, thrashed, and begged Adam to shoot him. But Adam just stood still as the monsters carried him back to their home. The tower, apparently satisfied, vanished from the DC area, reappearing somewhere in the west. Adam sighed, then began picking up his supplies, along with Nathan's. Despite his betrayal, Adam still felt a sense of pity for his old friend. But it wasn't enough to make him feel forgiven. He turned to the piles of dust that were once Marcy and Jack's heads. It was for them that he truly felt pity, finally escaping an abuser, only to survive the apocalypse, then to be murdered by that same abuser. Life had been unfair to them. He sighed, then began walking west. He didn't know why, not yet, but he felt the compulsion to enter the tower, to find answers about how and why this happened, and to make things right if he could. As he walked, a rather intricate mark formed over his heart. It displayed a tower, ruined, crumbling, and surrounded by people tearing it down with their bare hands. And that was Tower by Gray Walker. A little about the author. Gray is a writer from Alabama with an MA in creative writing. His favorite genres of writing are sci-fi, fantasy, horror, or some mix between those. His main sources of literary inspiration include Stephen King, Cormac McCarthy, Isaac Asimov, and fellow Reddit authors Elias Witherow, C.K. Walker, no relation, Matt Demersky, and Dale Drake. He has a Reddit account at www.reddit.com/user/mr-gray42. And you can visit his website at thegraywalker.wordpress.com. Thanks, Gray. For our second story tonight, first, we're all going to take a second and hit the like button down below. All done? Fantastic. I appreciate it. And next, we welcome a new author to the show, Brandon Wills. In this one, we're heading into the hills of West Virginia, where a city dweller's dream of country living takes a sinister turn. So without further delay, I give you, from author Brandon Wills, The Chicken Lady. After many years in my field of work, I was brought to the rural and wild countryside of West Virginia. I purchased a nice 2-story home for half the price it would have cost in most other places, relieving my wallet and my mind. The house came with 4 acres, most of it being mountainside, but it was nice to know I could explore and do what I wanted with it, whenever I wanted. I'm not an avid hiker, but I like to every now and then, and knowing that I could do so within a few steps of my back door was exciting. Owning a large chunk of land was also daunting in that I had no idea how to maintain it. But hey, I'm a smart guy. I could just look up what to do online, right? After living in an overpriced condo in a city for the last 10 years and spending my entire life within city limits, all of this freedom was just a bit overwhelming. After the movers left and I had unpacked all the essentials, I spent the evening relaxing on my wraparound porch. The porch went around the front half of the house and was covered. The drizzling rain created a hypnotic tap-tap-tap on the tin roof as I rocked slowly in the wooden swing that had come with the house. The rough old wood creaked as I swayed, and the rain pelted down overhead in a rhythmic beat. It was wonderful. I think I'll like it here. Little did I know, though. The next day, I had a Zoom meeting. Luckily, we had cable internet and what the locals call a holler because I wasn't too far from town, but far enough to where I was still isolated. In West Virginia, it's not uncommon to drive not even a mile outside of a city to find yourself in endless wilderness. During the warm months, you're blanketed on all sides by green and yellows, sometimes so thick in the older thickets that the sun can't penetrate through the canopy. It's like stepping into a time machine and rewinding the clock to the times before humans transformed everything. After the Zoom meeting, I decided I would drive by and see the neighbors. I hadn't been very far beyond my property by then, even when I had flown here to examine the house before buying. I was told the road went back a couple of miles by the realtor. I wanted to see what the neighbors were like. The stereotypes about this part of the United States were untrue from what I had gathered so far. Most people had been very nice and welcoming, unlike what you see in movies. After a few bends in the road, I was past my property and on to what lay beyond. The neighbors directly after me had a front yard that was a literal junk heap. It was littered with various broken and disused objects. A couple of old rusted-out cars that were missing pieces, a couple of washing machines, a lot of discarded wood, and various unrecognizable metallic things. And then, parked at the bottom of the property by the main road, there were the vehicles that I assumed they were still using. These people appeared to be destitute, but I was told by the realtor to not let that fool you.
Some of these people are wealthy because they were raised to be stingy with their money. Our state has never fully recovered from the Great Depression. Some people still live in that waste not, want not mindset. They just hoard everything and reuse all that they can, which can save you quite a bit of money. They don't spend that money unless they absolutely have to.
An older lady was sitting on the front porch. I waved, but she just glared at me with the icy response of a statue. "Well, okay then, you cranky hag." She continued to glare at me until I came toward a bend that took me out of sight. It creeped me out and gave me a sense that they were probably not as friendly as the other people I had met. Something felt off, and I was right. The realtor told me that they were named the Fowlers. Further around the property, they had a small farm where they were growing an assortment of vegetables, along with a small barn and what appeared to be a chicken coop and run. I had never seen farm animals in person, so this all seemed foreign and a little strange to me. I found a wide spot to turn around as the holler ended at a locked gate. When I drove past the Fowler's place again, she was tending to her chickens. She stood up and glared at me again, still not returning my friendly wave. Note to self, lock the doors at night. That night was uneventful and pleasant. I sat on the porch again and ate my hastily made bachelor special of a frozen dinner, heated with the expertise of a chef in my microwave, and a cold beer. As I was eating, I decided I should get a dog or cat for company. The house was much larger than my old apartment was, and now that I was a homeowner, I could have all the pets I damn well pleased. The evening spring rain brought the cool scent of petrichor. I breathed it in as I rocked in my swing, rocking back and forth to the rhythm of the pinging raindrops. In the distance, I heard a scream echo between the mountains. It was the sound of someone in pure pain and agony. It rang out once more, and I decided it was a better idea to go inside. The scream sounded again, and again, and again. I tried my cell phone to call the police, but the reception was spotty in the house. I walked out on the porch, but the screams had stopped. The realtor had also told me that some animals make horrifying noises at night, and not to be alarmed if I heard anything that I couldn't explain. I drank another beer, calmed down, and chalked it up to being exactly that. It was difficult to get to sleep, but after not hearing another odd sound, I drifted off. Later on that night, I was awakened from a dead sleep. It took me a few moments for me to gather my bearings, but once I did, I realized it was because of something not normal. The shrill, harsh sound was from something knocking on my window. What the fuck is that? I strolled over to the window, naked, because that's how I like to sleep. If it was some creep who drove to the middle of nowhere to break in, they were about to leave with an eyeful. I threw back the curtains in what I thought was a stealthy way to startle them, but instead of a person, what I saw was a chicken. The golden little bird stopped pecking and simply turned its head sideways to look at me. It did normal twitchy head motions as it examined the naked man staring back at it, then simply hopped off the windowsill and started walking toward the creek that ran along the front of my property. I watched until the little bird was out of sight and tried to go back to sleep. I thought it was an odd experience, but nothing to be frightened about. Why would one of the Fowler's chickens wander the approximate quarter of a mile distance to my house? Animals sometimes do their own thing, and they usually make zero sense to us humans. Maybe the dumb little bird thought this was their owner's home and was shocked to see a naked stranger answer instead. Maybe the poor thing was hurt. Maybe a wild animal had tried to kill it, but it escaped, thinking that my house was safe. I'm not a vet, nor do I have any experience with chickens, so all of this was just hypothetical. Besides, I didn't think it was any of my business what happened to the Fowler's animals. After her cold introduction, I couldn't care less. After dwelling on all this for a short while, I was back to blissful sleep again. Weeks went by with nothing eventful. Spring turned to summer, and I had started to feel at home there. I looked up some tutorials online and started a small garden, which only consisted of tomatoes, cucumbers, and corn to start. By early August, I had already reaped a ton of tomatoes and cucumbers, and the corn was nearly ripe. One Saturday, I inspected my plants and saw that I had at least a dozen tomatoes that would be fully ripened soon, and added that to my mental list. The next day, I did my daily check, but this time, they were all gone. In my fenced-in garden were 9 chickens having an absolute fucking feast on my hard work. I was pissed off, of course. I grabbed the nearest implement I could find, which happened to be my plastic yard rake, and swung it wildly at the unwelcome intruders. They cackled and flew, fleeing over my old rusting fence.
Get out of here, you motherfuckers! All of you!
Go! Go home!
Now that's not necessary, young man.
A woman's voice called out from behind me. She had a thick accent distinct for that region of America.
I'll get my girls and head on home. No need to kill them.
Startled, I stammered. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just upset that they ate my tomatoes."
Oh, that's just how chickens is. Anything red, they'll peck at it. If one of them's injured, they'll peck it to death and eat it clean to the bones. They're ruthless little birds.
She squatted down on her knees and called out,
Come here, girl. Come on, sweet girl.
They all rushed over to her and began eating food that she had dug out of her dress pocket. The jean skirt was so long it nearly touched her boots. She had on a floppy brown gardening hat and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. She stood up again, revealing her taller-than-average figure to me.
Come on, girl. Let's go home.
The chickens all followed her without question, and I watched in awe as they all marched down the holler road back around the bend and out of sight. A week went by. I had another Zoom meeting where I was made aware that they were going to promote me to the vacant position of district manager. The district in question was the entire state. I could work from home more often and would only occasionally have to leave for meetings, but that would mean a lot more busy work during work hours. Getting a pay bump that almost tripled my salary meant all that was fine by me. I paid a contractor to install a chain-link fence around the main part of my yard in hopes it would keep any curious chickens from barging in again, and I also had a security system installed with 12 cameras. The cameras weren't because I felt unsafe, but just so I could look around if I were gone. I could have sold the place and moved to a nicer piece, but I liked it there for the most part. It felt like home to me. My sleep was interrupted by the sound of fluttering wings and the pressing weight of something landing on me. As the haze of sleep began to lift, I realized it was a chicken standing on my chest. Its head turned to look me in the eyes.
What the fuck?
I screamed as I flailed to knock the thing off of me. It flew across the room and joined some friends it had brought along.
How in the hell?
That was when I noticed the front door was wide open. I wondered if I had forgotten to lock it, but I definitely wouldn't have just left it open. A figure appeared in the doorway there and glared at me through the darkness of night. It made a cackle noise, an imitation of what chickens sound like, and they all headed towards it. The figure and all the chickens left. Furious, I jumped up, slammed the door shut, slid the deadbolt into place, and decided the next day I was going to buy a gun and a big dog. I asked one of my co-workers whom I knew was really into guns, and they told me of a pawn shop nearby. I headed over there and purchased a pump-action shotgun capable of holding 8 rounds. If those chickens broke in again, I was going to make soup out of them. As for the dog, I headed over to the county shelter and adopted a big German Shepherd mix named Kodiak. He was immediately friendly to me, and the workers told me his breed was naturally protective. Heading home with my newly acquired safety, I felt good. A few nights later, I was doing a workout on my exercise bike with my earbuds playing a horror podcast to occupy time. Kodiak started going nuts. His insane barking was much louder than my podcast, and in alarm, I jumped off to see what it was. Before I could make it to him, I heard the sounds of an insane fight happening. The distinct sounds of growling and a body being slammed around echoed through the spaces in my home as I rushed to the source. Once I made it into my living room, I found Kodiak sitting, his mouth a bloody mess as he panted, a decimated corpse of a bird lying next to him. Feathers and viscera were flung all over the damn place, and it dawned on me what it was. A chicken. Shit. Great. Now the chicken lady's going to be pissed at me. I had no idea how pissed she was going to be. Things were quiet for a while. No chickens, no weird hillbilly lady. I felt peace for the first time since moving in. It stayed that way until one day when I was in the middle of a Zoom meeting when Kodiak walked in with a dead chicken hanging from his mouth. Jesus Christ, where'd you get that? Kodiak's ears lowered as if embarrassed at my scolding him. He dropped the limp black-colored chicken and sat on his haunches. I stared at the dead thing, trying to decide what to do with it. Eating it seemed wrong somehow. The only reasonable option I had was to bury it. I couldn't return it to Mrs. Fowler or she might burst the gasket. That lady seemed unhinged. It's hard to say what type of vengeance she would seek for one of her precious chickens. I climbed the hill a short distance. I decided that there was where I'd dig the hole. After a few minutes, I thought I had a reasonably deep enough grave for its size. I threw the carcass in, decided to say the Lord's Prayer, and then filled it back in with earth. That night, I was once again startled from sleep, but this time it was the sound of Kodiak crying for his life. I had been keeping the shotgun on a rack in the living room. After racking around, I darted outside. It was completely black outside of the range of my motion-activated light. I didn't need to see outside there, though, because in the center lay Kodiak, dead, and over a dozen blood-covered chickens feasting on him. On the border between the light and darkness, I saw a figure stand and step into the light. They were feasting on a piece of my dog. Their face was a bloody, horrifying mess as they pecked away at his carcass until I snapped out of my frozen state of horror. Mrs. Fowler never broke eye contact as she gnawed on the raw flesh of Kodiak. Her face only changed when she stopped chewing for a few moments to smile. Her teeth glistened wet crimson in the faint illumination of the LED light. The message was crystal clear. She wanted me to know who was in charge around here. The next day, I called the realtor back and put the place back on the market. There was no chance I was spending another night next to that psycho. You're probably thinking this, but yes, I did call the police. When they came out to look at the footage, my cameras were all ripped off their mounts and my laptop was gone. They wrote up a report and I never heard another word. My lawyer told me there wasn't much I could do without any evidence.
We need something to say for certain that it was her. I'm sorry about your dog, and that story is pretty messed up, but in a court of law, we need proof.
A month later, I was living in a new home halfway across the state. This time, I have 2 German Shepherds and no chicken-crazed neighbors. I paid an exorbitant amount of money to fence in a half-acre of the land surrounding my home, and I now own a small arsenal of weapons. Knives, swords, guns, anything really to stop an intruder. As for Kodiak, I had his remains cremated. It felt wrong to bury him on that property so close to that psycho and her birds. His remains sit on my mantel above the fireplace in a nice urn with a picture of him placed in the center. Whenever I walk past him, I pat him, for old time's sake. As I sit here writing this, I've been trying to eat a dinner that I received from one of those meal kits I heard about on a podcast. The meals are nice and all, but I have one problem. I've eaten every ounce of this meal except the chicken. So yeah, in case you're wondering, I hate chickens. And that was The Chicken Lady by author Brandon Wills. A good reminder that a change in scenery sometimes involves some foul play. Get it? Foul? A little about the author. Brandon Wills was born and raised in West Virginia. He's been reading, writing, and telling stories since he was old enough to do so. He's part of the Wild and Weird radio podcast and a published author with Velox Books. He still lives in West Virginia with his wife Emily and 3 children, Paisley, Brody, and Bryce, along with their plethora of cats, dogs, and chickens. Be sure to check out our pals at veloxbooks.com for Brandon's book, The Ouija Board Said It Was Hungry. Hey, thanks, Brandon.
And do old Drew Blood a favor, would you? Subscribe to his podcast wherever you do your listening and leave him a 5-star review and a kind word, even if you're listening on YouTube. He needs soldiers on all fronts to win this battle, and he appreciates it. To hear a premium ad-free edition of tonight's and all the other episodes, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click Patrons in the upper menu. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to their entire audio archive, all ad-free and available to download or stream. Thank you for your time and for supporting our sponsors. When you support our sponsors, you support this show. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all the latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with them each and every week. Oh, and you can find Drew Blood on Facebook and Instagram, and sometimes Twitter. The Drew Blood's Dark Tales podcast is accepting submissions, friend. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on the show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment, 10 bananas.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we part ways, at least till next week. So grab a drink for the road, friend. We'll miss each other on Halloween, but no worries. Just save me a little candy, and we'll try and keep it spooky. So may the wind be at your back, and may the road rise up to meet you. Careful with those Chinese doodads you find in the Halloween bowls, y'all. Geoff's kid once ate a tube of polyvinyl acetate you're supposed to blow bubbles with. Commie scum. Just a public service announcement there. Anyway, go fuck yourselves. Good night, y'all.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.